Thanks for joining us for the CaFÉ webinar today. I'm going to be sharing some tips for hosting public art calls on CaFÉ and some tools that might be helpful as you run either your RFQs or your RFPs. The key items that we'll cover today include the types of public art calls, just kind of going over the differences because that will play into how they show up in CaFÉ. I'll talk about how to set up your applications for RFQs and RFPs. I'll talk about a little bit about some jurying tips for public art processes. Also about how to communicate jury results and the next steps. And then I'm also going to introduce to you a new option that we have for folks who use CaFÉ for public art calls, and that is the shortlist application sub-call option. This is something new that we're rolling out. So I'll share with you all about that so you can learn more and see if it's something that you might need to use. So I'm going to start by going over the different types of public art calls. I'm guessing if you're here, you work with them regularly, so it might not be new information. But for anyone that's looking to use CaFÉ for some sort of public art project, I want to go over these differences. So there's two main types that CaFÉ can really be suited for, and that's RFQs, or request for qualifications, and RFPs, which is request for proposals. RFQs are used when an entity is looking to select an artist based on their or their studio's body of existing work. RFPs, on the other hand, require artists or studios to submit a proposal for the specific opportunity, in addition sometimes to examples of their previous work. And doing some, research for this and our experience with the public art calls, according to the Americans for the Arts, both types are commonly used, but RFQs are generally endorsed above RFPs and considered best practice because requests for qualifications are often seen as being more fair to artists, at least in the first round. But that being said, there are advantages and disadvantages to both types, and each can be used in their own ways based on the timeline, based on the project, to give free rein to the artist while ensuring that the artwork is appropriate for the public and commissioning agency. Another kind of differentiating element is some of the materials gathered from artists for an RFQ could include information about their training, previous work, evidence of their ability to create a public artwork, as well as work samples themselves. RFPs could gather those same materials, but also gather concept drawings, official proposal sketches, and/or written statements about the concept. RFQs are also used for basically any type of public art project and require minimal expenditures of time and money from the artist applying. RFPs are often used for specific subjects or specific projects. They can be used for different types of things, such as sculpture on loan programs. That's a case where an artwork might have already been submitted, or public art projects with extremely limited sites and have a very specific idea in mind that they need. And then, unlike RFQs, RFPs require a little bit more substantial amount of work by the artist to submit their proposal. It's not just submitting artwork that they already have done. It's thinking about the concept, preparing the proposal, and submitting the appropriate materials. So again, these are just the basics, probably nothing new to y'all, but I just wanted to share the comparison. And we'll talk a little bit about how some of these things are set up differently in CaFÉ, depending on if you are hosting an RFQ or an RFP. So, before we get to the CaFÉ side, depending on the project that you're putting together, you'll really want to come up with the prospectus internally and figure out if you are going to set up more of a qualification round or proposal round. Usually request for qualification turns into a request for proposals because the finalist would need to then possibly submit their design or their plan for the project being offered. So, both things can be shown in CaFÉ as well. So we'll talk about how to set up a public art call in CaFÉ. And, I'm going to go through the basic steps, but hopefully you'll pick up some tips along the way, even if some of this is more of a review for you. But to start off the process, you're logged in as an administrator in CaFÉ. Before we even get to the call editor itself, the first step to having a call be added to CaFÉ is requesting it. So let's go to the request new call button that will pull up the form. And I just want to touch on some key elements here that pertain to public art calls. So obviously you'd fill out your information and you would get to the section kind of about here where you'll start to be asked questions about the opportunity itself. And so the first one that's very important is, how would you like to organize and jury your entries? So this pertains to the jury type in CaFÉ. The jury type basically handles artwork differently. So you have to choose between two jury types: scoring by art or scoring by application. So quick rundown: scoring by art is when you need to review and select single pieces of art. So when an artist submits images, each image becomes its own application. It gets separated out, and every image, every file that they upload becomes a separate application. That way, the jury can go in and give a score to each individual piece of art. For scoring by application, all of the images for an artist that an artist submits are grouped together into one application. So this is helpful when you need to select individual artists or review their body of work over reviewing individual pieces of art. So this is the one, scoring by application, that is best used for RFPs and RFQs, because the images and materials that the artist submits will be grouped together, and the jurors will view that body of work, view that portfolio as a whole, as opposed to individual images, and they just give one score to that applicant. And if you're running, a sculpture call and you do want to collect images of existing sculptures, but maybe you need multiple images of the same sculpture, again, scoring by application helps you keep those images together. And there's a way to set it up where an artist might be able to submit multiple applications, each with their own set of images, so that you can have an artist submit multiple sculptures. And I'll show you a little bit about how to increase the amount of applications an artist can submit. But for a standard, request for qualifications, you would definitely want to keep it at scoring by application. Again, down here are some self-explanatory things. Will you be charging applicants an entry fee? Typically, we've seen public art calls not charge an entry fee. So the answer would be no there, but you can also charge an entry fee if you need to. I would also point out the application deadline. So this is the deadline that artists will have to submit for this call. So if you are doing multiple rounds of a proposal process, you would want to make sure that this is still set to the first deadline that you're going to create for them. So the first round deadline, everyone has to submit either their materials of examples of past work, or if the first round includes an additional concept design, still have that deadline be that first round. In CaFÉ, when you fill out this form, this equals to one call, one set of application submissions, and one round of, not necessarily one round of jurying, but one set of decision-making. Calls can't be reopened after the deadline. So I'll talk about the new option we have to be able to conduct a second round of collections. So speaking of work samples, that's the next one I wanted to talk about. So you'll want to choose, the first question kind of asks you, what types of work samples are you collecting? Are you just collecting images? Are you just collecting images and maybe a video? Or if you want to accept all types, you can select all. I think images and video might be sometimes the most commonly used for public art. So you can set a minimum and maximum number of images the artist should submit. Maybe you have a minimum to maximum video options that an artist might have a video about, a previous project, or anything that an artist might want to submit in video format. They can do that with the video option. Overall, you would just select the total number of work samples in this body of work you're collecting. How many total do you want? So you can collect up to 20 images, and you can collect up to 6 video per artist, so per application. It's not 20 maximum for the entire process. It's per artist here. I do also want to just say, while you can collect 20 images, I would just be considerate of the fact that you might not have jurors that want to look at 20 images per artist. So just pay attention to that. And even if it's great to have as many pieces of artwork to look at from an artist, that might be a little too much for each juror to look at. But if that's something you want, you can certainly ask up to 20 images. And then we have some other options in this form, of course, and once you submit that, that will tell our team that you are ready to add your call to CaFÉ, and they will build out the template in your account so that you can go in and insert the details. In which case, I'll go to the CaFÉ dashboard again, and we'll click on the call. Let's go into here. This is the one we'll look at today. Once a call has been added, you can just hop into the call editor here. And so I'm going to go through these pages: event information, application editor, and product editor. And I'll give you some information that most pertains to public art calls, and things you want to just pay attention to, along with some basic reminders for how to really put all your information in CaFÉ so that the artist is best prepared to submit to your call. So starting in event information, this is the main section for you to enter the information about your prospectus. This isn't for building the application, but it's for having your submission guidelines and requirements set so that the artist will need to understand what they have to prepare before they apply to the call. So let's go over some key areas here that require some more explanation. Let's start on the left-hand side. Looking at the call type, this is where you can select either public art. There's the call type public art there. That's the most common one. And if you're looking for public artists to find your call in CaFÉ using the list that they can browse of open calls, public art might be the best one for you, just because it's the most broad, and artists looking for a variety of opportunities will probably filter for public art calls first. You also have the option to use the proposals one, and that could be if you really are looking for strict proposals, and maybe artists who are looking for the same might search for your call. But when you're selecting a call type, you don't necessarily have to stick to this. This isn't like, a end all be all thing, but it's like something that can be used to search. Artists can search for your call. So you're categorizing yourself into one of these call types to kind of group you together with similar calls. That's why I think public art might be the best, because it's the most broad. And other fields important here, eligibility. So this is where you're setting the location of where the artist must be in relation to your actual location in order to qualify for the consideration. So if yours is open regionally, nationally, locally, if, for example, if it's set to local, the artist will have to look at the city that you're in to determine if they are eligible. Again, this doesn't actually dictate on a technical level what artists can apply. It won't actually look at the artist and say, hey, your city is not in this local region, you can't apply. This is just informational only, and the artist has to determine how or whether they're eligible. But I'm going to show you later on how you can kind of set up an application question to check for eligibility first. Moving on, the call listing details. This section is the most important because it's where you actually insert your information. Looking at the short description, you'll want to just make sure you provide a brief overview of the call and or a summary of the prospectus. This text shows in the call listings page that lists, all of the hundreds of calls we have on CaFÉ. So it should just give artists an at-a-glance view of the nature of your call and help them decide, if they're eligible at a quick glance, if it entices them, and hopefully want to learn more. So you can include some information, but it is 1,000-character limit, so you just want to keep that brief. The long description, though, is the primary space where your prospectus will live. That details the full description of the project, eligibility information, and the submission requirements. So if I actually click on, let's see up here, if I click on preview call, this will take me, there we go. A new tab. This will take me to the front end of CaFÉ. This is the view that the artist sees. You can click this to view exactly what your details will look like to the artist when they're reviewing. And the long description is what we'll display in this kind of information section first. So no short description, just the long description. So you'll want to actually maybe even, let's go back here, copy the information from your short description to start off your long description, but then expand more in your long description. So you'll want to make sure you include all the details the artist needs to know. And in tandem with that is the application requirements and eligibility criteria. These two sections also display on this event details page. You can see they're labeled as such. And you can continue to list out all of the information. We just have these sections split up so that you make sure you don't forget your application requirements and eligibility criteria. These should all explain in very good detail what artists should expect when they click apply, what they need to prepare ahead of time, whether that be letter of interest, resumes, references, understanding what work samples you're going to be looking for. That will all help the artist determine A, if they have enough time to prepare, and B, get those things together so that they are prepared when they do apply. So just make sure you provide a clear and full list of everything the artist needs to know, including eligibility as well. You don't want folks applying if they're not eligible. And if you're not specific about eligibility, then you might end up with folks that aren't able to actually participate. The rules and the terms to apply section, this is essentially the legal agreement. So back on this page here, this is the section that when an artist applies, they actually have to agree to this agreement in order to move forward and see the application. So this is where you'll want to enter the terms and conditions the artist must adhere to. You can include any, city restrictions, contract information, if applicable, and anything else that you want to reiterate about your eligibility requirements, because this is something that an artist actually agrees to. And so you want to be, again, not vague. You want to put all the information in here because this can essentially cover you if there's any issue that might arise. Also pertaining to public art calls on this page is the site plan and budget. So the site plan is where you can upload an image or PDF file of the public art site itself. Not everyone uses this, but the public art entities definitely use this one more. On the front end, this will show up on the right-hand side under View Site Details. You'll see for this demo call, we have kind of an overview look of what this example call was looking at, and kind of gives an artist an idea. So this could be an aerial shot, it could be blueprints, it could be just a picture from the side of where this public art project is going to take place, or it can just be anything else. So you can upload a photo, you can upload a PDF. It just has to be no larger than 2 megabytes. And then the budget field lets you indicate the budget that the selected artist will have to complete their work if selected. This field should only contain a number, as it will be used on the list of calls, again, where artists can filter and sort for opportunities. We have a budget filter that lets artists set a range to where they might want to, look for opportunities in a certain budget. So put the number here, but then in your long description, you'll want to actually put the relevant information about the budget that they should know. Again, just put the info up here, but just leave the budget to the number. We also have the standard settings on the right-hand side. I'm not going to go over these, but you'll want to set your dates up. You'll want to put any additional settings on there. Invitational private listing simply means that this call is going to be private and only those with the passcode can access it. Of course, this one's set with the passcode because it's a demo call, but if your opportunity is open to everyone, make sure you turn that off. But the jury type, again, here is one of the most important settings. It's really important because once you publish your call, you cannot change your jury type. That's because once artists start applying to your call, it's going to start handling those images in the specific way that we have it set, whether it's separating the images out into separate applications or grouping them together into one. Again, scoring by application is what you'll want to use if you are doing a public art call, because I'm guessing you want to combine all those images together. If you want the artist to be able to submit multiple applications, this can be used for if an artist submits once as an individual and then again as a team. Maybe it's a sculpture exhibition kind of call, so they want to submit multiple sculptures, each with their own set of images. You can increase this number. And then let's say another example is if you are doing a request for proposals and they have 2 different concept ideas, they can submit multiple applications. So again, if you need to change your jury type, do so before you publish your call, and just do that by contacting us, because only we, the CaFÉ team, can update your jury type. So that was pretty much everything in a kind of whirlwind motion of everything you need to do for the event information that kind of most pertains to public art calls. Next, I'm going to go to the application editor tab to kind of talk about, similarly, what you might be most aware of or need to be aware of here. So this is where you're going to customize the actual application that artists will use. So again, first on the left-hand side is the work sample requirements. This is where the CaFÉ team will put in the minimum and maximums that you put on the call request form. If anything here needs to change, or maybe it was not set up accurately, be sure to let us know before you publish your call, and we'll go in and change that for you. The reason you can't edit it yourself is that it has kind of stronger implications for other ways, especially along with that jury type, how things are handled in the back end of the system. So we just have to make sure we update those, because if something is set wrong, it could break a few things. So we just ask that you let us know when you need to update it. Next, we have the submission categories. The submission categories kind of lets you divide the applications you end up receiving by certain categories. So the category can be anything. For public art calls, the example I have here is different site locations. So, it might not be as vague as site A, site B, site C, but you might have, the names of different locations if you're kind of grouping these projects together. You might also separate them out based on medium categories. What you'll do is set up the categories, but artists, when they apply, will choose which category they belong in, and they'll submit their application for a specific category. But categories are nice because it then allows you to break up the submissions for the jurors so that they can view, all the applications for a certain site location all at once versus comparing them for a different category. Or you can do it for different disciplines and be able to look at the muralists as opposed to sculptors. So you can use categories however you want. You don't have to use categories. If you are just kind of doing a broad submission, you can turn this off and it won't actually do anything. But I'll leave that on so we can see in the preview what it looks like. The next section, application questions, is where you'll be building out the majority of the actual application. The first option here we have is the artist statement options. This is essentially a pre-built application question. Artist statements are pretty standard, so what we've done is just made it a statement saying, if you want to accept artist statements, turn this on. If you don't, turn it off. But if you turn it on, basically it'll ask on the application itself, please insert your artist statement. And if you want, you can set up specific instructions that kind of has a little bit more direction for the artist statement, but you don't have to provide this. You can always leave it blank and artists will simply know to just insert their artist statement. You can also set the character limit for the statements if you don't want to have super long ones. And I'll show you what this looks like when we get to the preview. Once you change anything here, just be sure to click Save Section, and that will change the artist statement settings. And next, and most importantly, is the custom questions section. This is where you'll build out the application with different kinds of question formats available to you. So we have a lot of different question types: checkbox, radio buttons, file uploads, drop-down lists, all these things that you can use to create questions for your applicants. Here's a couple examples. This checkbox one, I'm going to go into the edit here to show you what I did here. So this was a question we created in order to check to make sure artists are eligible to apply. And what I did is I set this to a checkbox and I just put the question as, confirm your eligibility. This project is limited, for example, to artists or artist teams that reside in the United States. And I just put one answer option and it says I am eligible for this project. So it's essentially just kind of one little agreement question that just kind of makes the artist pause for a second and ensure that they're eligible with the information readily available to them to say, I'm eligible for this project, so they can check that off. And if they're not eligible, hopefully they don't continue applying, but this is one way to kind of do that. So, when you add a question here, under the type is where we have the different type that you can set up for your question, and you'll just want to make sure you fill out all the information here. If this is required, I should actually change this to yes, so that everyone is required to answer this question. And then if you want to include additional help information, which will appear as a little pop-up bubble next to the question so that you can further explain why you're asking this question, you can use that option there. And conditional logic is something that we that you can use to customize your application further. And I will actually talk about this in just a moment here. So I'll leave that be for now. But you can build any other questions that you need. You can build as many questions as you need to ask artists. I would recommend not doing too many to prevent, application fatigue, but just the important things that you might need. Resume, for example, is a popular one in this scenario. So you can set up a file upload and just ask folks to upload their resume. The other thing that you might want to do is set up an informational only question to further reiterate your media requirements. Since RFPs and RFQs sometimes collect very specific types of work samples, maybe you need work samples from different types of projects, you want to be able to explain that to artists. So you can create an informational only question. Let me go in here. And you can further iterate. So for example, let's say if you wanted a maximum of 10 images, 5 of which are previous work, but 5 of which are proposal sketches and images, that's how you can reiterate that question. And that will appear on the application right before they submit their images. As long as you have it set to the last question in the list, I'll show you where it appears. But you'll want to put that on the application itself so artists don't have to refer back to the prospectus as much. They can have that information available to them. So those are just a few commonly used question types for this. Again, you can use, text box questions to ask specific or have them answer specific questions you have for them, things like that. Real quick to talk about conditional logic. Conditional logic feature is pretty helpful because what you can do is set up questions to display or hide based on an artist's answer to a previous question. So this allows you to kind of collect different information from, let's say, different people or people applying to different opportunities. So for this example, what you could do is, let's just say I do have these 3 different site locations and I want to ask questions specific to those individual sites. So I might set up a first question for conditional logic that, I'll have a question that says, which one are you applying to? Depending on which one they say they're applying to, they can then answer a follow-up question. So real quick, to show you how to do that, I'll click Build New Question, and I'll ask my first question first, which is, which location. This first one is just an internal label here, so I can just reference it later on. Let's see. Nope. Oh, this is not a text box. This is going to be a radio button. So which location? My question itself is, which location are you applying to? And I'll add 3 options because I set up 3 categories. Site B, Site C. This is going to be a required question for everybody. And in this case, I'm going to leave conditional logic off because this is going to display to everybody at first. There's a question about what is a radio button. Radio button is the style of multiple choice where you can only select one answer, whereas checkboxes, multiple choice, but you can select as many that apply. Radio button is just either or, one out of the 3. It's called radio button because it looks kind of like that. It's just one of those kind of outdated terms. So we'll click Create Question for this. Now that I've set up the question about which one are you applying to, let's build out a question that I only want folks applying to Site A to answer. So again, I'll click Build New Question. This one is going to be a text box. And I'll kind of say Site A, and then this is going to be my question of why. And I'll include a character limit, and I'll say, why do you want to apply to Site A? Again, yours might be more specific to the actual location, but this is just an example. This one's not going to be required, or I think I can still click it required for everybody that selected Site A. In this case, I do want to enable conditional logic, so I'll turn that on. And I'm going to continue through these settings. So I'm going to say, do I want to show or hide this question? I want this question to show. Basically, I'll leave it at show. If any of the following match, I can do any or all. So basically what I'm going to start doing is adding rules. I only need to add 1 rule in this case, but if I wanted to add multiple rules saying, they answered yes to this question, but no to this question, then I want this new question to show. In this case, we only need 1 of the following questions. So show this question if any of the following match, and then I'm going to choose the location question I just created. And I'm going to say is because I want it to match the option that I want. And I'm going to say Site A. that's a lot, but if you really read through this, it's pretty it's pretty simple. I'm going to say, I'm going to ask this question, and I'm going to have this question show if which location is site A. So I'll click create. Then I can either continue building questions for site A, I can set up the same settings, or I can then switch to questions I have specifically for site B, and do it that way. Again, this is a way to customize it. So instead of just saying, why do you want to apply to this site? That could be asked for any of the 3 sites. It might be more specific of, like, why do you want to apply to this one? This site has, XYZ involved with it. What about this is enticing to you, or something? This is, again, just an example. But to show you how it works, let me go to the preview call. So this is going to show me the application itself. Again, you can see the category selection, the artist statement option that we activated, eligibility, the file upload for the question. And then here's the question we just created. Which location are you applying to? You'll see if I click site A, it then appears, the next question appears about why do I want to apply to site A? And then once I had set up my other ones, those ones would appear as well. This here is that informational only question that would hopefully appear right above the work sample section. And because it's not, I'm going to change the order. And in order to change the order, I'm going to click on this little arrow here, and I'm going to drag and drop to the bottom of my list. Then I'm going to click update question order, and you'll see now preview. Now all of my reiteration of the media requirements are right above the work sample section. So those were just some few tips I have for building an application that works for you. Again, you'll want to customize as much as you need. One thing I will tell you is that you don't need to ask for artwork specific information or anything like that. So when an artist submits an image, an audio or video file, they're already submitting the title of the art piece, the medium that was used, maybe if there's a price attached to it, the year it was created. All that specific information to the artwork or the image they're submitting is provided when the artist uploads it to their portfolio. So you don't need to go in and ask, what's the title of the piece you're submitting or anything like that. So just keep that in mind. For the application editor, once you're done with that, you can move on to the product editor. Again, public art calls don't typically have an entry fee. But if you're doing a workshop, for example, and you do charge a jury fee or an entry fee, you can just set this up to the price that it would be and save those products. So just set up any fees that you might have. The next thing I just want to point out is once you start receiving applications, you'll find them here in events and management, and you'll see them in the received status. So if you want to do an internal review, you can click on the application, and then you can go through the applications that were submitted and review for, making sure they have the right materials and making sure that they're eligible before you move on to the jury process. So you can kind of do an initial review to make sure everyone going into the jury process are qualified applicants. My advice specifically here for public art calls is to pay attention to any missing materials and give artists a chance to correct any errors before the deadline. It can be tedious, but it's a nice way to ensure that artists all have a fair chance. So if you do see applications come in and you're reviewing them before your call closes, you can maybe spot anything that an artist needs to fix, or maybe they're missing a couple pieces of their portfolio or proposal documents, and you need them to go in and correct that. Before the deadline, all you have to do is change that status to incomplete. And once they're in the incomplete status, the artist will have full editing capability of their application. You'd obviously have to let them know that they have an issue with their application. So you can click into their application, click their email, and that will take you to an individual emailer so that you can email them one-on-one and say, hey, you're missing these details. I've put your application into the incomplete status so that you can go in and edit those details. And you have until the deadline to make those changes. I am now going to go into the jury process. I'm not going to go into it in depth, but I will share some tips I have for you. So let's go into the jury side. So yeah, CaFÉ makes it really easy for you to conduct a jury with multiple jurors or committee members because it allows you to set up the same scorecard settings for everyone and customize the information that is shown. Jurors can log in on their own time and review the applications, or you can set up a virtual or kind of in-person meeting to walk through each entry altogether. So no matter which method of gathering really you choose, CaFÉ allows you to input scores and keep things organized so that you can make your determination pretty swiftly. So as we talked about, I will, show you a little bit about the jury side and some settings you can set up that are probably most useful for public art calls. The first thing that I want to point out is the scoring rate. So you can choose, depending on how many jurors you have and how swiftly you need to make decisions, whether or not you're going to do kind of more of a scaled scoring rate or just a simple yes, no, or maybe. The scorecard style will display the applications differently. So you can choose which one you think jurors might like the best. Slideshow view displays the scorecard in a pop-up window and shows the images against a dark gray background. When the person is scoring, they will review each scorecard one after the other in a slideshow format. List view displays the same scorecard. They'll get all the same information, but this time it's in a list and it will be against a white background, and the person will be able to scroll from one application to another besides just clicking through it. Real quick, I can just kind of show you what each scorecard style looks like. So I'm just going to log out real quick and I'll go into our juror interface. So I've logged in with my juror username and now I can access the jury side. So I'm going to go to the call. And if you chose the slideshow view preference, the juror will then have further ways to customize their viewing preference, whether they just view a preview of the images, they don't have to score, or if they're pulling up the scorecard either with thumbnail versions of the images that they can click on, or a slideshow of the images first before they view their artwork. So let's do slideshow scorecard. I can show you what that looks like. And I'm going to open this up. Okay, so this is what the slideshow view looks like. They can see the image first, click through it, and then reach the scorecard. So that is the slideshow scorecard, but they can also choose the thumbnail scorecard, which looks like this, where they get the slideshow or they get the scorecard first, and then they can click on the image to view it full screen. This is kind of a bad example because there's only one image, so you couldn't really tell the difference. But this is what slideshow looks versus the list view, which I'm going to go in real quick and change on the back end so that you can see what the list view looks like. This is what the list view looks like. So again, you're seeing the same information, the same images that this is pulling up in a pop-up window. You can view the full images. And then we only have one application in here, but instead of clicking through each scorecard, I could just scroll through this page and it would show up one after another. And just to show you kind of later, the juror can put in scores and feedback here, click save, and everything will be good. You can see it saved on the jury side. So this is the juror portal. I really just showed this so that you can see the difference between the white and the gray, and that's what it looks like. So you can choose which one, and once you decide which one you want to work with, that'll apply to every single juror so they have the same view of the applications. Let me go back into the administrator side. And let's go back into here. Once you conduct your jury, everything that the juror scores will be available in this jury administration portal. You can click view scored applications to actually pull up the applications from your view and see the scores that the jurors are submitting and kind of take a look. Again, we only have one application in this demo call here, but it'll list out all of them. You can even then further filter out your categories so you can see that breakdown on those categories. The other settings that you can set up before the juror actually scores are hiding certain information from the jurors if you want. So you can set up the scorecard display and application questions to hide based on your preferences. So when you check a box here, that means you're going to hide it from the jurors. So if I don't want the jurors to know the price of the artwork, or if I don't really care for them to look at anything about the artwork, if you wanted, you could click those and it would hide that information. Similarly, maybe jurors don't, they aren't concerned about the eligibility, so you can hide that from them. But you want to make sure that they have their references and statement available to the jurors. If you want to hide the artist names, you can turn this blind jury process to active. That will hide the name from the application itself, but just make sure that, or be aware that an artist might include their name in the artist statement or references or in their resume. So it's not going to actually be able to hide the names from those materials. It would just hide it from the scorecard itself. So maybe you instruct artists, if you want a truly blind process, to make sure they don't include their name on any of the materials they're submitting. It's up to you whether or not you want to include the names or not. So that's a little bit about the jury process. Again, I'm not going to go through the whole thing. We do have available resources in our help center for how to do the second steps of managing and finalizing the entries. So go to the help center. The help center also includes past webinars so that you can view in video format a rundown of the jury process. Once you have narrowed down your round to either the short list of applicants or your selected artist, you'll want to make sure, and you will do that in the jury process, that your selected artists are in the invited status. And that's when you're ready to let them know that either they've been invited or not invited. Or you can also use the accepted status. That's typically known as well, to notify them. But whichever status your applications are in, you can head to the events communication section to notify them. So you would make sure, obviously we don't have any applications in here, but you would click on the invited status and click draft email. Let me just click on this one instead. And you would draft an email. This would go out to every artist in that status, so you can notify them that they've been accepted or not. You would keep the message generic because you're emailing multiple people, but you would say, congratulations, you've been invited. Here for public art entities, I would just make sure you're reiterating the next steps very clearly so that artists can understand what is expected of them, either in a follow-up round of submissions or a meeting with you or whatever it might be. You can put that information in this initial email. However, when you send this first email, an artist will then reply back to your email address. So just be aware that this is a kind of a one-way notification system as opposed to a two-way communication tool. Depending on what you're running, whether it's a request for qualifications or request for proposals, there might be a need to collect a second round of information or submission materials from artists. So as I showed you, a call kind of lets you select or collect, a set of materials, past work, even proposal documents, but you might have to invite back a set of artists to submit further materials or further proposals. So maybe you have a qualifying round and then a proposal round. Previously in CaFÉ, we didn't allow this unless you purchased multiple calls, because essentially this was just for selecting, that short list of applicants. But now we have this shortlist application subcalls for this purpose. Basically, what we can do is offer a call that can be used immediately following the primary one and collect up to 5 proposals from an invited or accepted applicants of that primary call. So it's kind of a way to conduct this second round of submissions. You can see on the screen here, I have some of the terms that we have for this. Basically, you can purchase a subcall for $100, which is pretty heavily discounted from the normal rate, but it can only be used for a primary in tandem with a primary call that has been open in the past 12 months. And we allow up to 5 applications from artists that must have been invited or accepted from that previous call. The other thing that's nice about this is that the per application and media fees will be waived for this instance, because essentially the artist already applied to the call, but this is just their follow-up round of submitting more materials. This is a relatively new option that we're providing. So if you have any questions or feedback from us, you can email us and we'd be happy to listen to you, because what we're trying to do is make it more customizable for public art entities to use CaFÉ and have these resources available to them. And I have some few questions in the chat. I'm going to get to them now. So for workshops, will the budget not apply? The budget can apply. It's just more used as a budget that the artist would be able to work with. So I'm not quite sure the application there for workshops. Maybe you can follow up and let me know kind of what you're looking for specifically. But if you put a budget in there, it's most likely going to be interpreted by the artist as, a public art budget, something that they can work with. And then from James, can the starting date change once I start editing the call? I had to estimate the starting date to set up the call, but I might need a few extra days. Yes, absolutely. The accept applications date, which is when the call will actually go live for artists to apply, you can change this because if you don't know when you'll have all your details ready, you might need to adjust that date. You can certainly change it. So just make sure, the only thing I'll say is that when you actually publish your call, you don't see it here, but you'll see the publish call button. Before you click that button, when you have everything ready to go, just make sure that this accept applications date is accurate. I say that because if this date is outdated and it's in the past, it's not going to affect whether or not artists can apply because it'll be in the past. But it might affect when you show up in the weekly opportunities notifications that's sent out to artists every Tuesday. That one lists calls that have been recently added, and those recently added calls are based on the accept applications date. So you want to make sure you're included in this. These calls are now open. Make sure that accept applications date is accurate. So just change it to the day that you're publishing it or in the future. What if you don't want to receive any works with wood in them? You would have to just stipulate that as heavily as you can on the call details. Say, we do not accept artwork with wood materials, or, be really specific about that, both on the event details, so on the long description, or eligibility or something like that. And you can set up that informational only question type so that when an artist is actually filling out the application, let's say they just skimmed the prospectus page and they didn't actually see that you don't allow this, you can do that. You can also set up a similar question like what we did here, saying, they have to check the box that says they're eligible. Maybe similarly, they have to check a box that says they don't have any, like if this is a big issue, you can say that they agree that their artwork doesn't have wood in them. But there's no way to prevent artists from applying to your call in such a way that looks at their eligibility requirements or their artwork. And then I have another question. Is there a way to shut down the application once the optimal number of applicants have been reached for a workshop? Yes, there's a couple different ways to do this. One is manually. You can, once you see the number of applications coming in, you can then go in and close the call by changing the application deadline date to the date prior so that the deadline is technically in the past. But the best thing that I think you should do for that is change this item sold available. So, the number of applications is essentially the number of products sold. Let's say you didn't have an entry fee, or if you did, doesn't matter. You can set this to the limit of number of applications you want to receive. So if you only want to receive 200 applications or even 50 for that matter, however many you need, you can set this up. Be sure to click save. Then what happens is when 50 artists apply, essentially when 50 artists, either they're paying or they're not paying the entry fee, once the 50 is reached, it will become sold out and no one else can apply to the call. You can always go in and increase this number if you do want to accept more, or you can decrease it if you've reached, a limit that you're comfortable with. And that way it would appear to the artist as sold out, even if they've started their application, but they didn't get it in on time before it sold out. They would see that. James says, proposals are often big files. Are there size limitations of the sub-call submissions? The size limitations for the sub-call is the same as a normal call in the work samples. So for artists, the work samples, at least let's say images, must be no larger than 5 megabytes. I understand proposal documents sometimes take the form of PDF files, in which case those do have a 2 megabyte maximum on there. But one of the ideas with the sub-calls is that it might lead to the ability to increase that limit, but this is kind of the first round, so you're still kind of limited to the CaFÉ image requirements. This concludes our webinar of how to use CaFÉ for RFPs and RFQs. I hope you learned some great tips or got a good review of the process. Again, if you have any questions about anything we covered today, feel free to email us here, cafehelp@weststaff.org, and we'd be happy to talk with you. Thanks again for joining us, and be sure to join our next webinar next month.